Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 6th BRICS conference. In tonight's roundtable, we will be talking about economic sanctions and the de-dollarization of the world's economy. My name is Priscila Cottarelli, and I will be the panel's moderator. On behalf of GEBRICS, I would like to thank you all for your presence, and thank you especially for our honorable guests for being here with us, sharing their views and researchers over these topics. Before we start, please don't forget to fill up the present sheet available at the chat. Only people that achieve 70% of presence in all panels will be eligible for the certificate. Our first speaker is Dr. Irina. She has a PhD in economic science, and she's the professor head of that chair at Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Also, she's the research director of the National Committee on BRICS Research. Dr. Irina, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, let me greet all the participants and express gratitude to the organizers and administrators of our conference. It's a great possibility to meet together and to discuss important questions and just participate in the series of questions and answers. The thing is that my topic is dedicated to the prospects for BRICS financial and trade cooperation in spite of the difficult situation concerning sanctions against Russia. And some other aspects will concern the dollarization of our economy. Actually, there's a large scale of different sanctions and restrictions and the closure of airspace and seaports and some personal sanctions against our people and their families. I can probably consider that it's more than 8,500 sanctions at the moment. In spite of that, we are looking forward to developing our relations because there are a lot of countries around the world who are not against development of cooperation, just in mutual interest, and just participate within the process of sustainable economic development of the countries and contribute to the safe finance and effective risk management of the economic and financial situation. And the governments of our countries they have different measures to support the economic entities. We take into consideration the strategic partnership within BRICS and other developing countries such as the Eurasian Union and some other countries. This strategic partnership affords us to penetrate to our economic and financial systems and to solve different questions of development. And we have new professional challenges and different possibilities within the direct and indirect financing and portfolio investments within green field investments with the support of the government and joint ventures not only within BRICS countries, but within the Eurasian countries, and with the support of the banks within the BRICS Intergovernmental Alliance and the Eurasian Alliance. And there are a lot of other countries that also participate within these banks and within the economic and financial projects, while just supporting the export finance, the guarantees, issuance activities, syndicated loans, factoring, leasing. It's going on. And the most important prospect and project at the moment is just the BRICS Eurasian economic payment system, because we are considering that dollar and euro is just the risky currencies, and we are developing our relations backed by national currencies that is mentioned in declarations of our countries. And we understand that within that we can link together the payment systems of our countries, and just to keep to the functioning rules, and just have definite technological background, and just go along with the mutual principles of functioning and supervision. The relations of our entities within this payment system go through different banks, and they participate as intermediaries within the processes. As far as the Russian Federation is concerned, bank is a classical financial institute within different types of payments and different types of support of the customers. And while solving the problem of developing our relations within national currencies, we also have the project of issuing co-branded and BRICS Pay valid instruments. They are presented to you, and these instruments can be used within the retail payments and private transfers and cross-border corporate payments, as well as interstate settlements. As far as the interstate settlements are concerned, all of our countries, partner countries, let's put it like that, because they are even more than BRICS and Eurasian Union. Within these interstate settlements, the central banks of our countries also play an extremely important role, and in spite of different political tension, they certainly support the participants of the financial systems of our countries, and just to contribute to the development of payments in national currencies, and usage of national currencies as the core currency of the contracts. We understand perfectly well that the prerequisites for national currencies is just the economic demand and the abilities of the currencies to perform as the money abroad within payment, savings, exchange base, etc. The process is going on, and we are quite happy with that. Our stock exchanges, the BRICS stock exchanges, have the agreement starting for February 2017, and within that type of relations, we consider that it's a kind of a background for BRICS global financial centers. With the new cyber platform for direct financing. These cyber platforms and banking threads are different, and they are successfully introduced in the Russian financial system, backed by our national technologies. And there is, generally speaking, as far as the globe is concerned, there is a mess of different penetrations. But anyway, we consider that the development of e-commerce and safe, transparent data exchange is very important for the usage of national currencies, and that's why we are going along this road. within the harmonization of relations. And one of the most important projects, in spite of different sanctions at the moment, is the hydrogen economy development within our countries. And the possibility of financing in national currencies, the cooperation on different types of hydrogen production on different cycles. And it's the future, and it's not cheap, but it's just the economy of hydrogen production. It's the private-public partnership activity that is presented at the moment in several spheres of our economy, and the investments are developing as well as pilot projects are presented. And we consider that the establishment of consortium for pilot projects will help us all just to have the results and to ameliorate the situation on the basis of public-private partnership with it. BRICS Plus, and all those who are interested in joining our projects. And it is very fruitful and transparent because the relations within our countries is very important, backed by a democratic approach and the provision of intergovernmental administration on the basis of respect and possibilities and abilities to do something that will contribute to the economic development of people of our countries and amelioration of economic situation. What we are thinking at the moment about within the de-dollarization, the euroization of the Russian economy, for example, and within BRICS, is just the concept of long and short-term cross-border secure interaction will help us just to develop our project. And the international software roster is quite of a need, and as well as the general concept of a secure single cyber platform. The aspect of harmonization of our relations is just the activity that we really pay attention to at the moment within the formation, the ecosystems in different types of economy, and we consider that the future of ecosystems in different fields is very important. So thank you very much. If there is anything, I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irina, for this very insightful and interesting presentation. I'm sure our guests really enjoyed it. Our next speaker is Professor Jervin. He's a political economist, lecturer, and researcher at the University of Pretoria's Department of Political Science, with more than 77 years of experience, which includes consultancy work for the Republic of Korea, Institute of Security Studies, and Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. He holds an MPhil in International Political Economy from the University of Warwick, and is currently completing his PhD in International Relations, and is an alumni of the prestigious Jervin Scholarship. Professor Jervin, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Priscila. I'll just share this. Cool. Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I just want to say thank you to Priscila for all her hard work in administering our session today, as well as GEBRICS and the University of Sao Paulo. I think it's quite an honor for me to be speaking here, so I'm really grateful for the opportunity. So today, I'll be briefly speaking about de-dollarization and what does this mean for BRICS. De-dollarization is a big ongoing academic debate within the political economy, which is my field of expertise, and I would like to shed some light on it for our viewers out there. Excuse me. So just some brief context of the dollar. Prior to what we call as the dollar denomination, we had various currencies circulating around the world. This is prior to World War I, which you had the British pound sterling. You also had the Spanish dollar. There were quite a few currencies floating around. Post World War II and the establishment of the Bretton Woods leave the dollar as the dominant international currency. As we all know, at the end of World War II, the United States plus its allies, at that time Western allies, established the Bretton Woods Institutes, which are the IMF, the World Bank, and the GATT, which is now the WTO. The dollar becomes the dominant international currency in most parts of the world. Thereafter, with the Bretton Woods, we had something called the fixed exchange rate, which some of you may be familiar with. Between 1944 and 1971, most currencies in the world were pegged to the dollar. So your currency was pegged in terms of the value to the US dollar. But then we have the gold crisis in 1971, or the Nixon shock, as they call it. And this fixed exchange rate collapsed. And then we moved to what we know as the floating exchange rate, right? The dollar still remained the benchmark due to the economic and political strength of the United States, regardless of the Cold War, which is occurring during this period of time. The one thing I'd like to sort of emphasize for our viewers out there is that dollar is part of what we consider the hard currency basket that includes the euro, pound, and Japanese yen, versus what we call soft currencies like the Russian ruble, Chinese yuan, RMB, the Brazilian real. Sorry, I meant to say the South African rand there, that's missing. The important difference between hard versus soft is the trustworthiness and reliability of the currency. When we say hard currency, we mean that these kinds of currencies have been established for years and years, and you can take, for example, a pound and a dollar, and in most cases, a debtor or creditor will take this currency, whereas the soft currencies are not so easily accepted. And thus the whole idea of de-dollarizing the global economy is substituting these hard currencies for what we call the soft currencies. So the key thing for the BRICS members is establishing trustworthiness and reliability in the currency. The reason being is you need to be able to reduce what we call the moral hazard within the political economy. So moral hazard, for some of our viewers out there may be familiar with it, is the idea that when two partners enter into a contract, one enters into the partnership in bad faith. This often happens in global transactions between debtors and creditors. And the fact is that the dollar reduces some of this moral hazard because you can trust the value of the dollar wherever you go. Right, and these are some stats from this year. Nearly 60% of world foreign exchanges were done with the dollar, and around 65% of global trade was done in dollars. This is according to some data I got a couple of days ago. However, the context of the dollar is changing, as our previous speaker has spoken, that globalization is challenging the dominance of the norm in which the dollar dominates. And we need to consider the impact that globalization is also having on the impact of the dollar, as more and more countries are growing. Their polarity within the political economy, their strength within the global markets are growing and growing. And there's a larger cry for countries to use their own currency instead of relying on the hard currency baskets of the euro, pound, and the Japanese yen. Just something interesting today, I just wanted to pick up and just show the exchange rate. So if you look at today's exchange rate, this was done about an hour or 2 hours ago, so it may have changed slightly. The Brazilian real, 1 real gives you 19 cents of a US dollar. 1 Russian ruble gives you 0.02. The Indian rupee 0.1. The Chinese yuan to a dollar is 0.14 cents, and the South African rand 0.06. Exchange rates are extremely complicated as they float, and they are based on market conditions. And these exchange rates reflect a complex reflection of market conditions, investor confidence, and political factors that impact it. So as you can see, if you are looking at it, this is basic politics 101, politics as power, you can see the exchange rates are a reflection of power, and it just shows how powerful the US dollar is in relation to all of these currencies. So most of us, well, on the panel here at least, are from one of these developing countries. So if I look in the case of South Africa, my country, our rand holds almost no value towards a US dollar. I would have to put 100 rand just to, 17 rand just to get $1, which just shows how strong the US dollar is as a reflection of market conditions, investor confidence, and the political factors that drive the strength of our currency. So what and why is de-dollarization? Why is it important? So de-dollarization aims to substitute / move away from the dollar as a dominant trading currency. So in global markets, whether it be the trade of oil, which is our significant on the market, goods and services globally from one country to another, the dollar has become a significant medium for international trade. The link between the dollar and the US economy and how it impacts states around the world is very important. And this is why I think we are moving towards this large movement of de-dollarization. Soft currencies and developing markets like the BRICS are extremely sensitive to changes in US fiscal and monetary policy. Because we are using the dollar, if the United States economy gets a flu or sneezes, we all catch a flu. And we saw this in the 2008-2009 financial crisis, where the housing bubble led to a global recession because we are all interconnected, particularly with the use of the dollar. And we are subject to domestic policies run by the US federal government, the US Fed Bank, and central banks that impact the flow, influx and outflow of dollars, which is really, really important for developing countries, is we need to buy dollars. We need to use up our currency to buy dollars to trade in international markets. And if the interest rates fluctuate and there's a control on the amount of dollars that are in the market, things become more and more expensive for our countries to do business with, right? And additionally, there's the impact of globalization. We're becoming more and more interconnected. So as I mentioned, when something happens across the world, it really affects everyone. So the current the current issue between Russia and the Ukraine is impacting global economies in various ways as we are interconnected. For example, the flow of wheat, for example, is significantly affecting South Africa as a result of the complications between Russia and Ukraine, as we're dependent on, for example, wheat coming out of the Ukraine. And this shows the interconnected nature of the world. And this is the same for the dollar. And an important thing here, I think this is linking now back to our previous speaker on economic sanctions. The United States Department of Treasury has a major oversight on the SWIFT financial transfer network. This is an important system for global banking and how you can do international transfers. And this is a very strategic, important weapon of economic sanctions that can be used by the United States against anyone it sees fit to apply sanctions to, such as in the cases of Russia and Iran. They use economic sanctions as they can control the SWIFT financial system. And now countries that are moving away from this are trying to sort of negate the impact of the economic sanctions. And sometimes, obviously, these sanctions is obviously debatable. It's up for debate whether these sanctions are appropriate and are they appropriate and in what response are they used. And the key thing, I think the key takeaway, besides all the technical issues around how do we actually de-dollarize and the fiscal and monetary policies around it, is de-dollarization is about power and control in the global political economy, right? The dollar holds a lot of power, significant power, particularly to the United States and its allies, and those with the hard currencies. If you can establish a solid hard currency or improve the amount of trade of your currency, you increase your amount of power and control within the political economy. And this is very important. As we live in a globalized world, power is distributed amongst many states, non-state actors as well. And states are wrestling for control in the political economy. And BRICS and the other states are looking to establish a polarity in international markets. So thus, this movement to de-dollarize is not just done in the sense of moving away from the dollar, but it's done in a way so that polarity within BRICS and other countries that are going to use their national currencies, it helps them establish some kind of control to sort of insulate themselves from any issues within the US market or economic sanctions. So attempts at de-dollarizing, this is a few that I've been checking out and quite interesting to consider. So Brazil, for most of the Brazilians here, you guys have an agreement since 2013 with China to do a national currency swap between the real and the yuan with certain items. It's not fully encompassing. There is still the use of the US dollar. Then China has agreements with Australia, Russia, Japan, Brazil, and Iran to trade dollars to trade in dollars. Trade between China and Russia is a very interesting one. Fell between 50% in 2001. That's the last quarter of last year in dollars. So it just shows a significant movement between two major significant powers within BRICS and significant emerging powers within the global political economy and international relations. Russian gas is sold to the EU, Japan, and to Turkey partially in the ruble. And there's been some recent discussions between Russia and Saudi Arabia in the use of the ruble in the exchange of oil and gas, right? This is a very interesting one. I did not know about this. It was quite interesting that India and Russia have been trading in the ruble and the rupee during the Cold War. So they've been doing this they've been doing this since, according to the information that I found, they've been doing this since 1977. They've been trading between the ruble and the rupee. So this is very interesting. Be a nice case study to understand the impact of the ruble and rupee. South Africa currently doesn't have any of these, but we are exploring possible partnerships with China, India, and Russia. So there are some significant attempts globally to move away from the dollar. It's going to take a bit of time, as the dollar has been the dominant currency since 1944. And just to conclude, these are just some points for our viewers to consider and anyone who's interested in this topic. De-dollarization is possible and feasible, but must be phased in slowly. The reason being is it needs to be phased in slowly because you need to gain, as I mentioned, investor confidence, and global markets need to trust your currency. Trust is the most important part of the political economy, and you can talk to any hedge fund investment banker. Confidence is key, and investor confidence drives a lot. And if you phase the currencies in slowly, you can reduce the moral hazard which most investors are concerned about. This requires also good fiscal and monetary policies from these governments. So if you're going to be trading in your national currencies, there needs to be a show of good faith in the application of your fiscal and monetary policies, so to reduce any risk that might be on either party. As mentioned, de-dollarization is both a political and economic matter. It is not purely economical, where countries just see they want to use their own currency, but it's a political tool to show or demonstrate some form of polarity, to show that your currency has strength. It's a soft, as we say within foreign policy, it's a soft tool of diplomacy to show that your currency has the strength, right? And also for countries wanting to insulate themselves from economic sanctions, as my previous speaker has spoken about. By moving towards a de-dollarization, you can sort of reduce the impact of those economic sanctions, particularly if you're heavily dependent on the dollar. And just a final, this is just a sort of an abstract question. I don't know anyone, there's no real correct answer for this. What type of global monetary medium are we looking for? A replacement for the dollar? Or are we looking for an alternative? Do we want to replace the dollar with something else? Do we want to have multiple alternatives? Or are we only thinking that we would like to establish one for bilateral trade between countries? Do we see ourselves in 20 years' time having multinational currencies trading with each other and having a global basket of different currencies? Or are we looking to completely replace the US dollar? So yeah, these are just some points to consider, but it's a very interesting topic and it's developing. It's a very fluid topic and interactive, but it needs to be approached with caution because, as I mentioned, it's both a political and economic matter. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you so much for your lecture about different currencies and the de-dollarization. It brought a lot of important information to better understand what is happening to our world today and how de-dollarization is not a theoretical thing, but it can actually be implemented. Thank you. And now we are going to tonight's last speaker. He's the Brazilian diplomat Maurício Gurjão Bezerra Heleno. He works at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. He holds a master's in public policy and society from the State University of Ceará and a law degree from the Federal University of Ceará. Maurício Gurjão, you have the floor, please.
No, sorry.
We can hear you.
Priscila, Dear Priscila, I was muted. Sorry. Dear Priscila, dear colleagues of GEBRICS, distinguished panelists, distinguished audience, good evening. It's a pleasure for me to be here again with GEBRICS at the USP BRICS conference. Last year, I was here again discussing South-South cooperation with distinguished speakers. And today, I have the incumbents of discussing a more difficult issue, which is economic sanctions and de-dollarization of the world economy. I don't have the intention of speaking like an economist. I'm a diplomat, so I want to bring a more political side of the topic. I want to bring my personal experience as a diplomat working at the General Coordination of BRICS in Brazil. So as a diplomat, I follow the Brazilian participation in BRICS discussions, especially at the higher levels, ministerial and presidential levels. And I also follow the discussions at the working group levels, including the financial working groups, which discusses issues as currency and de-dollarization. I have here, I divided my presentation in three basic topics. Economic sanctions, the case of Iran, how do BRICS approach the issues of economic sanctions and de-dollarization, and the Brazilian position on these topics. Let me start by telling some stories, some personal stories. During my period at Instituto Rio Branco, the academic school of diplomacy, we had a discipline of international politics, and we had to do a research about economic sanctions. We had to answer the question, do economic sanctions work? That was our issue, our mission. And we chose the case of Iran because it was very representative of the current context back then, back in 2019. There was the Trump presidency imposing his maximum pressure policy on Iran. And we analyzed the case of Iran to try to understand the effectiveness of economic sanctions. And I can answer in advance, they didn't work, they don't work. That was our conclusion. And my mission here today is linking these three topics, how the case study of Iran can help us to analyze the topics of economic sanctions and de-dollarization in BRICS issues, how these topics clarify these discussions. Well, we studied the Trump executive orders against Iran, which were supposedly aimed to cripple the Iranian nuclear program and reduce the Iranian regional influence. Trump didn't mention regime change explicitly, so we didn't consider it as an objective of the North American policy. And even with these lower standards, his policy of maximum pressure didn't work because Iran continued its nuclear program, and Iran continues to be a regional power, a major oil producer, a major oil exporter. But we concluded that one of the main effects of his policy, of the American policy of maximum pressure, was to generate an incentive for Iran and other countries to search for alternatives for the dollar, because the sanctions against Iran were so broad and so deep that they affected almost the whole scope of the Iranian economy. They affected naval industry, arms industry, nuclear industry, oil and energy, iron, aluminum, copper, the banking sector, insurance, and others. So we concluded that Iran has become a kind of war economy, an economy which tried to substitute imports and try to reach a kind of autarky. And another major effect of these sanctions were their secondary effects, which relates to Brazil and BRICS countries. What I mean is that these sanctions are so broad and so deep that they affected, for example, our agricultural sector. Let me tell you a bit of personal experience. In Instituto Rio Branco, we had a lecture of our agriculture minister, Ms. Teresa Cristina, and she mentioned that our producers were afraid to export agricultural products to Iran because of fear of sanctions, because if they were caught by the American authorities, they could be deprived of access to dollar and access of the American financial sector. And after a lot of discussions, the judiciary, Brazilian judiciary, interfered and authorized the exports of these agricultural products because they were meant, they had a humanitarian aspect as well. They were aimed to improve the agricultural production of Iran's agricultural sector, so Brazil couldn't be deprived of the opportunity to export these products. Another personal story I can mention was a conversation we had with an Iranian diplomat, and he displayed his concerns with these sanctions because Iran, for example, couldn't apply to be a member of the new development bank, the BRICS bank, because as a sanctioned country, the compliance sector of the new development bank couldn't approve Iran because the new development bank would be sanctioned and it would deprive the bank of its basic activities. It would practically shut down the bank. The only because of the situation of Iran as a sanctioned country. And these are two stories which I have seen as a Brazilian diplomat that relates to the Iranian situation. And as a grouping, BRIC was created as a means to establish a more a multipolar world, a less unipolar world, a world where countries are not afraid to trade and to invest in each other because of the fear of being sanctioned by unilateral actions. And these concerns were translated in action in BRICS. I can mention, for example, some recent summit declarations. In 2022, for example, BRICS countries agreed to enforce and support the United Nations Security Council as the sole authority for imposing sanctions against other countries. So we explicitly decided that we do not support unilateral sanctions, that are sanctions approved outside the authority of the United Nations Security Council. We also approved in this article, Article 34, that we support the working methods of the United Nations Security Council sanctions committees to ensure their effectiveness, responsiveness, and transparency. So in a multipolar world, countries should not have the authority to impose sanctions against others, especially if these sanctions have the power to impose humanitarian effects. They impose hunger, they impose poverty, they impose underdevelopment, and they affect mostly the developing world. That's the BRICS mindset on this topic. BRICS countries didn't mention secondary sanctions like those one I mentioned to you before, but there is some disagreement, some language disagreement between countries. For example, China uses a language which is the abuse of unilateral sanctions and long-arm jurisdiction. And Brazil doesn't agree with that language of long-arm jurisdiction. We use extraterritorial jurisdiction. It's juridical debate, doctrinary debate, but it has some political aspects behind them. Brazil prefers to use a more established language in the international courts, which is extraterritorial jurisdiction. But these debates doesn't appear in the BRICS declaration. They were put off. What you can see there is this Article 34 that mentions the United Nations Security Council. We also have the Contingent Reserve Agreement, the CRA, which is a mutual financial support mechanisms for countries, for BRICS members that faces difficulties in their balance of payments. But this mechanism is based in US dollars. So BRICS hasn't advanced in de-dollarization in this aspect, in this mechanism, because the contingent reserve agreement is based on US dollars. If BRICS countries raise the CRA, asks for help, that help will come in the form of US dollars. And in practical terms, we are not sure if it will work out because of sanctions against Russia. It might turn out that these dollars cross the US financial sector, US financial system, and they might be blocked. So one of the mechanisms of the CRA is testing the mechanisms. Every year the CRA test is carried out, but in US dollars. But they are discussing testing CRA in local currency. And I have to clarify that the Brazilian focal point for these discussions is the Brazilian Central Bank. And we know that central banks tend to be more conservative. So we can't expect abrupt changes, revolutionary changes. We can expect very slow discussions, very slow advancements. But Brazil has in mind the importance of diversifying the currency power, the currency situation, so that countries would not be under the sole authority of the dollar. That's the Brazilian standpoint in this situation. We also have some working groups in BRICS. We have BRICS Payment Task Force, which is also led by Brazilian Central Bank. This Payments Task Force was created years ago to discuss new forms of payments between BRICS countries. And they participate in activities linked to the CRA, the Contingent Reserve Agreement. I have skipped some slideshow. Let me show some graphics. I have here the situation of central bank reserves. And we have here in 2020 that US dollars represent 61% of central bank reserves. There is a slight reduction of these numbers. In 2021, they represent 59%. We can see a slight reduction of US dollars participation in currency composition. So, as Professor Jervin and Professor Irina mentioned, we can't expect a very quick change in these matters, but a slow process of de-dollarization and diversification. I also brought here a graphic about Russia's export to other BRICS countries. And we can see here in 2021 that Russia used only 36% of dollars in the share of Russian exports. I also mentioned these topics here, recent declarations, CRA, working groups. And I would like to conclude with the Brazilian position. Itamaraty is very clear in its position of opposing unilateral sanctions and supporting the sole authority of the United Nations Security Council in applying sanctions. It's the only institution, the only organization legitimate to impose sanctions. We are also against secondary sanctions or extraterritorial jurisdiction because they affect mostly developing countries, including Brazil. Brazil has about 80% of international reserves in US dollars and almost 5% in Iranian. Our basket also includes euro and yen, but it excludes other BRICS currencies. The central bank does not object the flexibility of CRA operations in other currencies, but as I mentioned, it reserves the right to maintain its discriminatory authority to choose currencies. And changing the activities of CRA, the CRA constitutive agreement, would need to go through Congress, go through the Brazilian Congress. So CRA only lends money in dollar. In order to change that, the constitutive agreement would have to be reformed, and that would require Congress activity in Brazil. And as a matter of conclusion, I would like to stress that Brazil supports a multilateral approach to economic sanctions in a context of reform and strengthening of the multilateral order. As a matter of fact, we support the sole authority of the United Nations Security Council, as I mentioned, and we have to be very cautious in imposing these sanctions because they normally affect populations that are not involved in political confrontation. Brazil also believes that monetary diversification in trade and investment is a healthy tool to prevent future crises. But discussions on that matter should be led with moderation and without a spirit of confrontation, especially in BRICS. BRICS shouldn't be a tool to confront the United States or confront the dollar or confront the West, but BRICS should be a tool to diversify the world power, to promote a multilateral and a more democratic world order in which all countries could dialogue and reach a diplomatic solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really good to better understand how economic sanctions work in practice and to see what is the Brazilian position on the matter of sanctions and de-dollarization. Now, we received some questions from the audience, and I'll open for debate. The first question, I believe it's directly for Dr. Jervin. It is if you consider the Brazilian real a soft currency.
I saw that question. Yes, definitely the Brazilian real would be considered a soft currency or within the basket of soft currencies. It shares the similar characteristics to the South African rand, the Russian ruble, Indian rupee, Chinese RMB, any other emerging currencies, in the fact that it's a highly fluctuating currency depending on market conditions. The other countries have somewhat, the political instability can vary from government to government. It's a very, very flexible currency. So obviously between maybe trading between South Africa and Brazil, or Brazil and China, which they do have, they're able to change the currencies. But if you go with the Brazilian real to international markets and try and trade at the petrodollars with the oil trading companies or countries, they may not accept this. So the Brazilian real definitely falls within what I would consider a soft currency, but it is one of the stronger soft currencies. As I showed by my currency conversions, it has one of the better exchange rates to the US dollar. So it's a soft currency, but it has significant strength over other soft currencies.
Thank you. The next question, I believe, was addressed to Dr. Irina. And the person asked if there are examples of contracts involving public administration negotiated in a currency other than dollar in BRICS countries.
The thing is that in 2013, there was a declaration of BRICS countries, and the leaders of our countries have agreed on development of the usage of national currencies as the currency of loan operations and payments and so on and so forth. And the New Development Bank and other banks that serve the interests of economic entities of our countries, they are just within the process. And as far as the development of the usage of national currencies are concerned, and further just a single technological background of national currencies system payments is just the declaration that is made also by the central banks of our countries, and the agreements between our countries. The first agreement was signed between the Central Bank of the Russian Federation and the Central Bank of India. So the process is going on, and actually we are also just discussing the possibility of introduction of a single currency that will be circulated and used for our economic relations, and the idea that it will be backed by gold of a certain percent of grams of gold. Because as a scientist, I can say that the usage of and the privilege of the usage of the currency of any country is just a kind of appreciation and just probably the privilege of at least one country that is the issuer of this currency, and probably it will be better from the scientific and probably practical point of view to introduce just a single currency for our economic relations. It was an example of the International Bank for Economic Cooperation that introduced the convertible ruble. It was created for the usage within the Comecon region, and it was really successful and also backed by just gold. And most of the countries of the Central and Eastern Europe and Mongolia and Vietnam and Cuba, as the members of this bank, used this currency for just payments, and it was very successful. And just actually we're just thinking about such kind of a vehicle that can be introduced for the payment system of our countries.
Thank you. And actually, we have a question that talks about uniting BRICS currency. And here, our audience asked, Professor Maurício showed that the Brazilian debt composition, dollar has an important part of it. I would like to know if in Russia and in South Africa this also happens. And if it is the case, if the composition of BRICS countries' national debt could be an obstacle for a de-dollarization of the world and creating a single currency in BRICS.
Who will start? Can I? Okay. The thing is, the debt, it's not a problem generally. The problem is just the unsuccessful management of debt of any country. The contemporary economy, the global economy, has all features of the debt economy. And just as far as the debt management, there are different types of it. And it can be just the possibility of just the usage of these types of management of debt of any country, and it will probably can solve the debt that was issued in US dollars, for example. But anyway, I would like to mention that one of our colleagues, Jervin, was quite right that we should not just be in a hurry of changing the currency of the agreements that exist at the moment. And as far as dollars are concerned, it's just some agreements within the financial markets are within the period of 100 years. Anyway, there is a possibility of conversion and restructuring and so on and so forth. But we should not be in a hurry, and it's a delicate question, and the question that belongs to the political assessment of the relations of each country to the debt management. And anyway, but there are several possibilities for the settlement of that generally in any currency, a dollar including, and that's it. Mm-hmm.
Before I give the floor to Professor Jervin, I think Maurício wants to say something. I believe he needs to leave our call. Maurício?
Hello, Priscila. I'd like to ask you the permission to leave because my baby girl over here is starting to cry. She wants to sleep, and I have to help. I don't know if you can listen to her. She's here, starting to mourn. So
don't worry.
I'd like to thank you for the invitation. Thank the panelists, Professor Irina, Professor Jervin, for their company. It was a pleasure to share some ideas and insights with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a nice time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I believe Professor Irina didn't understand we were going on, but well, Professor Jervin, would you like to comment on?
Yeah,
just...
could you just repeat the back end of the
Sure.
of the question? Sure.
Sure.
I lost whatever.
The person would like to know if in South Africa the composition of national debt is also composed in dollars, and if it is the case, if the composition of BRICS countries' national debt could be an obstacle for a de-dollarization of the world and a united currency in BRICS countries.
Yeah. So how the debt works is, then the national debt is divided into international debt. So our debt to our fellow creditors, whether it be global institutions or fellow governments, that debt is always calculated in dollars. That debt is usually in dollar demarcated debt. Internal debt that the government, for example, the South African government may have with, I don't know, tenders or partners in the country is always done in rands. So internally, it wouldn't be such a challenge. Obviously, you could use your own currency to cover the debt, but in most cases, international debt is managed in dollars. So it would be a challenge to now move away from the dollar. You'd obviously have to convince these international partners that that there is trustworthiness in paying in the Brazilian real or the South African rand, and so forth. So, but it's not also a clear yes or no, Priscila, as well, because some debt is also compromised in local currency. So South Africa could be doing business with Chinese construction companies, for example, and those deals could be negotiated in Chinese RMB. So it's not clear, but the majority of debt is down in dollars.
Thank you so much. I'll have one more question for you, if you accept it. Is if you believe Western sanctions to Russia have accelerated the process of de-dollarization.
Well, that's hard, and I think our colleague would be better suited to answering on exactly. But I don't necessarily think so. It's been a slow process towards de-dollarization. I think particularly countries that are really affected by the impact of the dollar, it has for them obviously accelerated. In the case of Russia, Iran, any other countries that have been forced to accept economic sanctions. I think it's it's still a slow process, because the actual technical calculations, the establishing of, so I can't speak for people in Brazil, in your country, Priscila, but I know, for example, international global businesses in South Africa, they would be willing to accept that the dollar still has value, it still has strength in it. Whereas, you could take a South African rand somewhere in Central Africa and you wouldn't get value for it. Same thing with the real. So I think it has, to a certain extent, accelerated some of it, particularly, like, for example, Russia has really moved forward with de-dollarization. We see this with the agreement with China and the possible agreement with Saudi Arabia and Turkey. But for some countries, the quota, the status has remained the same. And it will be also a challenge for, you think about, I think about some of the Central American countries who don't have their own currency. For example, Panama uses the US dollar as their own currency. They're going to be countries that are going to be caught in the sort of quagmire, we'd call it, that what happens when you do de-dollarize the global economy? What happens to those countries? So yeah, I think yes and no, it has accelerated, but also not accelerated.
Thank you so much. And we actually received one more question from the audience in YouTube. I'll just read this one, and then we'll close this meeting, okay?
No problem. No problem.
Do you believe the decrease of productivity currently going in most of Western Europe as an effect of decreasing working hours and more social rights will have a negative effect in the long term in the dollar world and the Western world.
Sorry, could you just repeat it? I lost the last, but could you just repeat it one more time for me, Priscila?
Sure.
Sorry.
Do you believe the decrease of productivity currently going in most of Western Europe as an effect of decreasing working hours and more social rights will have a negative effect in the long term, meaning the long term in dollar and euro currencies?
That's an interesting one, because that's like everything is really interconnected, because the decreasing rates of productivity in Europe is actually linked to the energy crisis that's occurring in Europe, which is as a result of the current dispute between the Ukraine and Russia. Obviously, you have a reduction of gas, the Nord Stream line. So I think that's a challenging one, because you have gas, which is an important tool that drives productivity. And now these countries are looking for alternatives. A lot of countries, actually, this brings us back to bring this full circle back to our debate. I don't think the person maybe meant this, but the conflict essential, or the dispute between Russia and Ukraine, is also forcing countries to, it's accelerating de-dollarization, because Russia is only accepting, excuse me, countries willing to buy oil and gas are only willing to accept paying rubles to Russia. So I think in one aspect, yes. I'm not sure. I don't know. That's a bit of a tricky one to answer. If it's the work conditions, possibly there'll be less income, but that's the EU on its own. That's another complicated one. So I can't really give a complete answer on that. But I can say, because this question has made me think of de-dollarization in a different angle, that the dispute between Russia and Ukraine has forced certain countries to move towards de-dollarization, especially those who want to buy oil and gas from Russia, because they're not accepting dollars due to the SWIFT sanctions. So yeah, so I do apologize to that person. That's the best I could answer that question.
No, don't worry. And actually, that's the case of Brazil. We have been purchasing oil and gas from Russia in national currency, not dollars anymore. So yes, the conflict is pushing for de-dollarization. Well, so that's the end of our panel. I thank you very, very much, Professor Jervin. Professor Irina is not here anymore, but thank you as well, and Maurício. And I really hope to see you guys again in further events. It was a pleasure having you here.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who watched.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.